good evening. Welcome students, trainers, and everybody who is here to our industry guest speaker event for this evening. So we have a interesting topic, which is effective communication. And I think everybody knows that in whatever business you are or management, communication is the foundation of everything that you are, every interaction, every contract, and everything. So to discuss this in more detail, we have the pleasure to have our industry guest speaker here, who is Anne Hough, and she will be discussing this topic really in more detail. The topics that are related to obviously effective communication and that she will touch are the frequency of communication with stakeholders, managing difficult and sensitive information with stakeholders, finding the right communication channel based on the audience, and more. So that are basically all topics and areas that we have partly discussed in our units that we are continuously talking about because they are important. So she's going to share her insights and experiences so on how you can leverage your strengths and work on your weaknesses and really to achieve the goals and succeed in your individual working careers. So I think also while we listen to Anne, she will inspire and motivate you to develop really a positive and proactive mindset, take ownership of your very own personal and professional growth, and to be open to learning and new opportunities through creativity. So thank you for joining us, Anne.
Thanks for having me.
And I just give a little bit of a hint of your background and you introduce yourself. So I think for all of you students, it's quite interesting because Anne has a degree, master's degree in international business that she achieved in France. She is French, and Anne came to Australia as an exchange student and then on a student visa to Brisbane. Okay, she graduated then at Griffith University in international business. And I think from the past, from then on, I let her quickly explain what she has done after her university time.
Yeah, so my background is very much in procurement and supply chain. Before working at Boeing Defence Australia, had about 10 years working as import-export with the mines in New Caledonia. So with the last 4 years having my own business. And I joined Boeing 5 years ago. I'm a senior subcontract specialist there. And that's my background.
So I think with your very humble explanation, I know that you have been nominated for the award Women in Defense for your work in legal in the legal part and contractual work. So well, I think that's a great achievement. I feel like I got it.
Thanks, Linda.
Really
yeah, Boeing announced to me today that they've put me forward for a Women in Defence Award, which is great honour. Yeah, it's nice to be recognised for your work.
Okay, awesome. So to our students, just a heads up, if you have any questions, and please, if you want to share your experience, do so, okay? Because this is not just talking and listening, it's really, you know, we want to exchange also your experience, because I know that a lot of you have already been working or have some sort of experience. So, and trainers included, obviously. Okay, over to you, Anne.
Can everyone see the screen, the slide pack that I've opened? Yep. Okay.
Yes.
So Marlena touched on the topic, so I'll move on from there. So I briefly mentioned that I was senior subcontract specialist at Boeing. So I guess to explain a bit more about that role is, I figured best to start by explaining supply chain. So supply chain is very much between the customer requirement and the subcontract and the supplier. So really, we kind of like the meat in the sandwich. We constantly have to juggle both sides of the fence. So our company and customer requirements and our suppliers. I suppose the key in there is that we're managing a lot of stakeholders, and we need to understand really well how the company is working and who in the zoo, and who can provide insight on all the those requirements that come our way. The reason I'm a bit cryptic is, unfortunately, I can't give specific example due to the nature of defense, program, and but I think we can, work on examples that are a little bit more vague. So it's really important to have information communicated to me properly from the business, so that I can then pass on that information to suppliers. So if the requirements are a bit vague, it doesn't really work. This is how a big company, as you probably know, works. There's different departments, and it really, like I said before, is really important to know who's who. Really, the supply chain work, which goes from putting together requirements, then drafting the contract and sending it to the supplier, is really a team effort. So we've got the engineers that put together what they need, then the commercial team and legal team, which I'm part of, then put on all the commercial and legal paperwork to it and ensure that the schedule is met. Through this level, Boeing being Boeing, there's a million processes and checks and approvals. So it is really important to communicate properly and ensure that you've done all your checks and balances. Yeah, so I guess an example of how communication can go wrong in that respect is, engineer often kind of get carried away, and they will start writing a scope of work, and then you read it, and it's really hard to understand, well, what is it that you want the supplier to deliver? Is it, you've got all these technical words, but what is it that the supplier is going to look at and go, well, I'm going to price against this and price against that, and this is when I need to deliver by this time, and etc. So I usually come in and I have to kind of make it into more of a plain language, and to be able to send it to a supplier who can then look at it and price properly. So the communication is important in every single aspect of this process. Is me communicating with the engineers so that I understand what they want, and then translating that in plain language to the supplier. So obviously with that, we then talk about to a lot of people, to all sorts of layers of people and all sorts of degree of hierarchy as well. And it's really important to not hesitate to speak up, because especially how I feel is that supply chain is at the end and it's the face of the company towards the supplier, and if things go wrong, we're always going to be the one having to fix it. So even if a program manager comes to me and you know, and he's done something wrong, I have to speak up and I have to be the one going, okay, the process is this, so this is what we're going to do. And I've put here a few strategies to help with communicating with kind of someone a bit higher. It's always to go and see them and be kind of genuine, and they always understand risk. So if you kind of explain to them, well, you're taking a risk here and this is why we have a process, then they usually kind of understand and will respond well.
So I interrupt you.
Yeah.
It's basically, Anne, what I understand that sometimes when you have these let's say negotiations with engineers and so on, and you mentioned they are getting a bit carried away because so it's really bringing them back to reality in order to prevent an escalation of impossible goals. Is that right? More or less?
Yeah, that's it. So there's it's important, you know, for supply chain to be the person delivering the message to the supplier and making the, you know, commitment on behalf of Boeing. And sometimes in a meeting, engineers will get carried away and say, oh, your company's great and we really want to work with you. And this could really imply that the supplier, yes, they got the deal and an order is coming. And that's not always the case. You've got to follow the process, because there is multiple tenderers involved in a supply chain process, and you want to make sure that while, you know, you like a company, you can't really show it, you know, and be too excited, because so I often had to, you know, even remind chief engineers to go, okay, you know, don't say that, or you're not in, it's not your place to say.
So when you are calling for a tender, for example, do you have preferred suppliers, or is it really like blank canvas that you set out the tender and that's, you know, whoever, or do you get in touch first with preferred suppliers?
So I think I didn't even mention, but yeah, so the area I'm working in is fast prototyping. So we're doing prototyping programs within Boeing, and the technology that we're looking at is very niche. So usually it's one or two suppliers that the engineers would have identified. We put them onto the preferred supplier list, and then we start engaging them, and it can start with conversation. We'll send a request for information. They'll provide us their capability statement and what they can and cannot do, and based on that, we kind of down select to the few suppliers that will seem to be fitting all the boxes, and then we'll start the tender process from there. But it is important that while we can have informal conversation with suppliers, once the tender process starts, then it has to follow a formal process to ensure the competitivity is followed, because we could get in trouble with you know, ethic and things like that. But I guess the strategy of that I wanted to explain here is a bit sometimes when you have a conversation with someone who's senior, it's a bit nerve-wracking and you don't really know how to put it. So it's always good to go and speak to them, but also follow up with an email, ensure that the message is clear. And when I've started up in some companies, sometimes even when you've been in Australia for a while, their accent is a bit, hard to understand, or you feel like you've not explained something properly because you couldn't find a word that day. Anyway, it's kind of good to always follow by an email and say, okay, so I understood the task is this, and then they'll confirm, and then you can move on and do something else. That's one of the things that I've been using quite a lot. Okay, so that's basically what I was saying. When you try and, when you have something difficult to say, it's always easier to say face to face and confront it, and not leave things kind of spill and become a bigger deal than it is. So in the case that I was looking at here, if in the case of an engineer going out of their way and making promises, then I will have to go back to the team, deal with it internally, remind them of the Boeing policy that, only I can talk to suppliers, and then have to deal with the supplier and just make them understand our process, and that they can't expect, basically that we're not making commitment until a purchase order is issued, which they're usually pretty good. Even if, things are not going smoothly, you can always talk to people and find a way. I think this is pretty much self-explanatory. So from there, that was kind of, a presentation of how much communication is important in my role. Has anyone got any questions on this?
Questions or comments? Trainers included.
Or similar experiences where it's sometimes hard to speak up? No. So I guess from, recognizing how communication is important, then, we've got obviously formal and informal way to discuss things. So depending on who you're talking to and, what the message is, you can decide, what will be the best way to go about it. Yeah, so that's pretty much self-explanatory. This is delving in a little bit more into the informal. So informal way of communication is a really good way to build relationships. And relationships are really important, even at the highest level. When, you have a supplier, you've been working with them for quite some time, having that relationship really helps making sure things go smoothly, and building that rapport will allow for things like if I end up getting in trouble and the engineers forgot to buy something, and I go back to the supplier and explain to them, and I've got that good relationship, they usually get out of their way and they'll help us out. Whereas, if you're only behind emails and it's harder to build that relationship. No, so informal. Sorry, here you go.
So it's really about building up that personal relationship, talking to the people, getting to know them, and understanding maybe also how they are ticking. because I think that is very important. For example, if I'm talking to somebody and I know that is a person who is more formal, or they like to have everything very well structured, so you know how to approach them. I think that is a very important factor.
That's very true.
Hey, Anne, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
It's Mordecai. Hey, how are you? And I'll give a bit of a background. During COVID, one of my businesses, and it's in reference to supply chain.
Yeah.
I suffered greatly from the anemic supply chain that we had at the time, because I bring goods on demand from China primarily, and I had to adapt my communications completely with all bunch of stakeholders, but most importantly, my customers. How did you go about it? How did you conduct yourself during that time when we had supply chain failure across the world?
Yeah, so my view is that I don't take news greatly when it's coming at when the communication fails. So I have and I guess it wasn't really during COVID, but I've got a supplier in Czech Republic, and I will email them, status, and they just go silent. And then you've got to chase them up, and then they give you bad news. That's not, that's not good. That's not good at all. You won't take news very well if it's in writing and 3 months after you've asked for the first time where it was at. I think, we can all understand how COVID, happened, and it was a, global issue. If you know that something is going to be late, you need to talk to your customer, because that gives them the chance to adjust their requirements to find mitigation into the supply chain risk from early on. So this is what we did at Boeing. We identified the area where supply chain would be a risk, and we tried to mitigate by either expanding the supply chain, so finding more than a different source of goods, or adapting our requirements.
I agree with you. I mean, my company, Retail 17, is not Boeing, certainly not, but that's what I've done. And what I've learned quite quickly early in my career is that stakeholders tend to be so empathetic if you could communicate effectively, in particular when it comes to a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And a side note, I ended up grossing hugely on net revenue as a result through adaptation for this period. But thank you very much for sharing your experience.
No problem. Great. So yeah, bottom line, you can have phone calls, online meeting, or emails. They're all great way to build that relationship. And even if everything can be done through writing, it's still good to put a face. And I feel like with COVID, we all kind of realize that now. When we finally go into the office and get into a room, we get a lot more out of it than just being behind our desk. In the more formal way of communicating, so this is where I would choose communication where I need traceability and I'm accountable for everything going on. So at Boeing, we've got a really strict process when it comes to tenders because of ethic practices, and also making sure that there's no conflict of interest and no issues there. So from the moment that the tender is issued, everything needs to then be in writing. And for example, if suppliers or the panel of tenderers have question, everything gets registered in a clarification register, and then that will be distributed back to the tenderers, to all of them, to make sure that they all get the same information that allows them to provide their proposal to us. So really formal way of communicating avoids any grey area, any room for interpretation. And when you're working with contracts, and it's really important to have, if things go wrong, you go back to your notes, you go back to the register, you go back to the contract.
So, and I have a question about the tender. So I know obviously that in defense there are information that are sensitive or classified and so on. So even when you call a tender and there are different companies that are signing up to participate, so I suppose there is some sort of written process and procedures in terms of safeguarding that classified information that the people have to agree to.
Before even talking to Boeing, you have to sign the NDA. So
okay.
So the first step, I suppose, of even discussing anything with suppliers, especially in the area that I'm in, we can't discuss anything without a non-disclosure agreement. So we contact each tenderer, and then they sign a non-confidentiality agreement. We can then send them our requirements, and we did have some breach, and when an agreement then get breached, we kind of send them formal advice that, you know, you're in breach on contract and there could be consequences, and that's usually sufficient for the breach to be resolved very quickly. I don't think anyone wants Boeing going after that.
So, Anne, if you don't mind me asking a question, so when you're narrowing down your tender list, how do you actually come to the conclusion that you have a preferred tender, and do you also have a backup supplier just in case the preferred tender or the successful tender defaults?
So like I said, we've got quite a bit of a process. So with a big tender, we would usually have a panel that will then evaluate all the proposal. So we've got the technical team, the quality people, the environmental health and safety folks, myself for all commercial information. We even have a Australian industry content person. They will all receive the proposal, and they will score the proposal against criteria, and then we can then evaluate the response. So the response will be evaluated against criteria and get a score. So we'll end up with the top one, and then second and third.
And have you ever had the experience of having to rely on the second or third tenderer to supply Boeing? Or is it mainly?
I haven't. I haven't really, but I've had more often where you send a tender, and unfortunately, most of the responses are incomplete, or one supplier stands out almost too much, and you're hoping for a second better answer so that, you know, you can fall back on someone else. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going back to my notes.
Okay, I hear a student. Was it a? No. I got all excited.
I got one question for you, and
Yeah.
in which area did you start your career in logistics?
Which area? So when I first came into Brisbane, I could only come on a student visa and couldn't really work. I think I could work only 20-hour a week. And then I found it really hard to find work. So there is a few import-export company in Brisbane that are all run by French people, and that's kind of how it was easier for me to find a job there, because I spoke French. And what I was doing there is I would get inquiries from New Caledonia. That sometimes it would be a photo of a really rusty plate on a tractor, or like a pump, and the pump needed replaced, and I would go and find the pump somewhere in the world and then ship it to them. So we used to do everything from sourcing the parts to the shipping document, and then delivery to New Caledonia. Does that answer the question?
Yes, no, it's interesting because I do work in logistics as well, and it's interesting because I started working for a French company as well. I don't know if you know Geodis, but I was working.
Yes.
I was working for them for a while, and then I moved here to Australia, and yeah, I really like logistics. So.
So this in France, or you worked for them? Oh, here in Brisbane.
No, I'm from Mexico, and I was working
okay.
back home. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, they're a big company, and they do have an office in New Caledonia. Yeah.
Oh, good to know. That's cool.
It's only 2 hours away on the plane.
Far away.
I thought I'd close out the discussion with kind of how I manage the contract. So once the tender response has come back and we've selected our preferred tenderer, we go into contract management. And often what the scope I'm dealing with is engineering services, design and manufacture of products. And I found that being prepared for things going wrong is always the best way. And that can be achieved through, various forms of communication. And what I usually do is set regular meetings with suppliers. So once, they started their work, we meet with them bi-weekly or weekly. And we take note on, who's doing what are the action. Half the time, it's really technical conversation, and I don't always understand everything, but I'm trying to, follow and write as much as I can. That encouraged responsibility and accountability from us on the action that we need to meet, but also on the supplier. And when they come back to us, weeks after, and things have not progressed, I can say, well, look, on that date, you said you would do it then, and find a amicable way to resolve things, than having to go straight to the agreement, going, well, according to clause blah blah blah, you're closing into being in breach. So it's I thought that's a good way to prevent things from going wrong. Things don't always go right, sorry. And I do have an example of a supplier that installed our AV system. So we have a big room with multiple screen to display some demonstration that we do, and everything was running smoothly, contract in place. They started the work, and then, you know, it turns out the panels were faulty, one after the other, and things were not progressing. So that's when I jumped in, and, you know, I was like, okay, weekly meeting, what's going on? What are you doing to fix the issue? And through that cadence of being with them on a weekly basis, making them accountable for progressing and fixing the issue, they ended up, you know, resolving it. And that's it. I hope that was helpful. Has anyone got any other questions?
Yeah, I have one more, Anne,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
No.
What importance does Boeing place regarding sustainability when it comes to logistics and suppliers with regards of, you know, recycling products and reusable products and things like that? Is there much emphasis on that when you actually go to tender or speak to your suppliers?
Yeah, it's starting. It really is starting. We've got a working group working on ways on how to improve. I think the focus at the moment is more sustainable aviation, and so in terms of logistic and supply chain, we were starting looking at ways of onboarding supplier and allowing them, as part of their capability statement, to show us what are they doing to be more sustainable, and kind of use that as, you know, in our database as a, you know, positive point with that supplier. But having said that, not a lot has been done yet. I think that there is a team focusing on, like I said, sustainable aviation and sustainable fuel and those sort of things. But that seemed to be more the focus at the moment with Boeing.
Thank you.
Hey, Anne, I would like to ask a question. It's Mordecai again. Would you like to share your experiences with us in working with Boeing, such a global organization, your experience with us with working with people from different cultures and different languages, and how did you perhaps have to adjust yourself, the way you negotiate and communicate accordingly?
That's a really good point, and I probably should have, you know, added that into the discussion, seeing there's a lot of international people here. Yes, you end up, you know, having to really adjust your language depending on the culture. I find European, when you negotiate with them, are very direct, and not a lot of back and forth in terms of discussion. It's more black and white, and needs to be. So during our contract negotiation, it's the same. We try and track every amendment into the agreement to make sure that, you know, we've got traceability of the progress. This would be done in writing with the European, and fairly quickly, whereas I've had a couple of agreements with the Americans, and they need to talk. They need to, like, talk about it hours. And it's a very different culture, and they're not straightforward either, the Americans. They dance around. They don't really give out a lot of information on why they want a position over the other, whereas other cultures, or Australian, we can go, okay, well, this is the reason why we want this position. Can you meet us halfway?
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I did receive, funnily enough, in one of my team member received an email back this morning from a French supplier, a quite cranky email saying, I did not agree to your terms and condition. And the way the email was written, it was, I thought, yeah, that's French. Straight and, you know, no form and no trying to find a solution. So
yeah.
Yep.
Some cultures may find it offensive or aggressive, but for some cultures it's norm. It's okay to communicate.
Yes, and I knew that he didn't mean it to be aggressive, but just, oh well, this is not what I agreed on, and that was that. So
Yeah.
that's why I said I'm happy to jump on a call and talk to them, see what happens.
That's great. Thanks for sharing your experiences with us.
All right. Anybody of the students who wants to ask anything, seeing that we have the opportunity?
I think I do have an experience to share. It is related to supply during COVID. I heard that question earlier before. So during COVID, I was in the US working on a remodelation, and most of the big pieces for the renovation, most of the big pieces were coming from China. And when in the US there was nothing really happening, nobody was using any of the measures or closing businesses. No, it was just news. But still, we started getting all the delays. And in this process of trying to contact the suppliers, we received the message of sorry for the delay in the response. Unfortunately, I have this bad news about the borders being closed and all the shipments being delayed. And also, no, but we're working hard on getting everything shipped to you as soon as possible. Now our team is working at home, and this part was key, working at home, trying to stay safe and staying close to their family, something along those lines. And that part, when I shared that message with the rest of the team explaining the situation there, was so touching in a nice way, because first, we were not sensitive to what was happening really, because it hadn't reached the US by then. And it was not the dry answer of the company can't do anything for you, we can't refund you, just wait. No, it was the sensitive answer of the people, putting us in the shoes of the people that are there, really with their hands tied. There's nothing they were able to do, and there were more important health things related happening to them. So I thought that was a very good thing. And if I was not the final client, if like these were products that I had to resell and my clients were waiting, I think I will have used a similar approach, saying that our team or our providers are working hard on these. And I believe also that COVID was a very good moment to add these personal touches and talking about the people in the company, not only just the service and the product, and everybody understand that.
Well, I agree, Alison, because I think in every kind of business or business relationship, it's really important to find the right tone, because you can say, you know, sometimes when you are very direct, it can ruin or compromise a relationship if you are showing more empathy, and you are also pleading for empathy, basically explaining what is happening on a more personal basis. I think then you know, the relationship or the people who are not receiving what they are expecting, then you know, you have a better understanding and you're more lenient to that. So thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
yes.
your experience.
People can have a lot of empathy, and you've got to give them credit that you know, if you explain things and in a language that they understand, that will touch them, that they will understand as well. Yeah.
All right. Anybody else with any more questions or sharing their experience? Okay, no, everybody is gone quiet and thinking and reflecting. So, okay, so Anne, thank you very much. We are really grateful. I think that what you shared with us, you know, your knowledge and your expertise has really given us a good insight and also perspective. And we think that, you know, it was really a valuable contribution to our students. And well, also to us trainers, because I think it is really coming to the point of what we are, the messages or the units, the content that we are conveying. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody else, students for attending, trainers too. And also thanks for giving your insight and asking questions. Okay, have a nice evening, everybody. And I suppose back to class.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
And can I just ask you a personal question? I was coming down the staircase from my unit this morning, and I ran into my neighbor. I don't know what her surname is, terrible, but her name is Sarah. And I said to her, she works for Boeing, and I said to her that we're going to listen to your talk today, and she wanted to know your name. So I mentioned your name. She knew you. And,
oh, really? What's her last name?
And I was just wondering if you know any Sarahs that work at Boeing, so I can go back to her.
Yeah. What's her last name?
I can't remember her last name. That's the trouble. We just know each other by first name, so that's a fault on my part. But I just wondered if there was.
There's a few. There are a few people at Boeing.
Well, I'm gonna tell her that there are a lot of Sarahs working there.
Come and say hello. No, all good.
Yeah, thank you.
No, that's a nice coincidence.
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. So